So now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce my boss, Andy Scoggin. He is the chair of Idaho Business for Education. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that IBE is a group of 221 businesses all across the state of Idaho, from Sandpoint to Soda Springs to Idaho Falls, and all points in between. We're so grateful for the businesses that are members of our group, so grateful for Andy's leadership. So with that, I'd like to introduce Andy Scoggin, Chair of Idaho Business for Education.
Thank you very much, Rod. And my role is actually pretty brief here today. And first thing I'd say is that it's wonderful to be able to spend a day listening to and interacting with really smart people who get things done. There are groups of people who are really smart people, but really smart people that get things done is a rare group, and that's the kind of people that we're surrounded by today. And speaking of a really smart person that gets things done, it's my pleasure and honor to be able to introduce the governor of the state of Idaho. And most of you know, and hopefully all of you will know, that first of all, the roots of Governor Brad Little in the state of Idaho literally go deep, go very deep. He comes from generations of people who have, his family, who have been leaders in agriculture and agricultural industry in the state of Idaho, have innovated and have moved that industry forward. And so therefore, obviously, he has a great pedigree as far as his ties to this great state. He's a product of the higher education system of the state of Idaho as a graduate of the University of Idaho. He has worked very closely with businesses throughout his entire life and career across the state of Idaho. And he obviously has given himself and dedicated much of his life to public service. The last 2 decades, he's spent heavily involved in the legislature in many different roles. Obviously spent many years as lieutenant governor of the state, is the governor of the state of Idaho. He is, I found out, everywhere over the last several years. I've been places, and even as lieutenant governor, he's so involved in so many groups. And one group that I just mentioned, I went once to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce annual gala, and I was very impressed with the work that they were doing. And they did a retrospective of their last year's events, and they had galas and they had educational events with children and students. And they had all different members of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce showing up, but in almost every picture, there's Lieutenant Governor Brad Little. I thought, how can he be there and everywhere else that he is? But that's the kind of involved individual that he is in the state of Idaho in encouraging progress, encouraging education. History and that pedigree that he has is very important in his role as the governor, but I think even more important is the fact that he has a vision for the future of the state of Idaho. And that's and he's made a few very broad statements through his actions early on in his administration about the fact that one of the strong pillars of the future of Idaho, in his view, is the strengthening and strategic growth of the education system. Having a very strong, very forward-thinking education system that pushes itself out in terms of accessibility and availability to students across the state at all levels of the state. And with that kind of leadership, we're going to continue to see growth in our state. And we know that Idaho businesses are moving at light speed to stay up with their competitors who are moving at light speed across the nation, across the globe. And without an incredibly strong educational system filling the pipeline of the people who are going to be able to allow our businesses to be successful in the coming decades, we're not going to meet those needs. And we have a lot of work to do. We will always have a lot of work to do. Every state in this nation does, but we have a lot of work to do. And to have a strategic, thoughtful leader at the head of this of our government is critical to us being able to move this forward. And one of the first things he did, as you know, and he may speak about this a little bit, is he asked a group of very competent, successful, and driven individuals from business, from government, and from education to come together, and they're working right now and have been working very hard to help to blueprint where we go next in education. That group is co-chaired by one of Idaho Business for Education's own members, Bill Gilbert, and also by Debbie Critchfield, who's the president of the Idaho State Board of Education, and many, many other dedicated people working with them, and we're excited to see where they go. But the point is that the governor said, I need these people to come together and help us to speak as one voice across the state and moving education forward. That's just one of many, many moves he's already made in just months in setting a pace for education in the state of Idaho. So it's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you the governor of the great state of Idaho, Governor Brad Little. Governor.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you. Thank you. I guess I'm plugged in. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, Andy and Rod, thank you. Andy, thank you for giving half my speech, so I'll only be here for a little bit. I appreciate that, but you know, most of you in the room have heard this over and over, but it never hurts to repeat it about what my goal has been since I got this job, and that's, you know, that we create the best possible opportunity. We can't guarantee anything, but we create the best possible opportunity for those of us that are here today to thrive, and most importantly, that our children, who some of them can go anywhere, choose to stay, and for those that left, come back. And I remember when I first got the job as lieutenant governor, one of our big exports out of Idaho was our children. And that's a big thing for me, that we, as we go forward, that we set ourselves up to where that never happens again. Andy talked a little bit about my history. Idaho's always changed. We're in a challenging location, a challenging state, a challenging environment. But today, that rate of change is almost meteoric. Population, incomes, and especially employment needs in this automation revolution that we're in the world, but particularly here in Idaho. So how do we address this challenge? I think we continue, which is what this conference is about, on a coordinated talent strategy, which is part of this event. We have dozens, if not hundreds, of good and great successful parts to this strategy, but they can always use better coordination. But this is an ongoing activity, so it's a little like trying to change a tire on a moving car. It's not that easy. But first and foremost part of that is education. And fundamentally, for education, it's got to be about literacy. If we're going to spend half our state budget on education, we have zero excuse to not have our kids reading proficiently at the end of the third grade. And that's all kids. Gifted kids, challenged kids, economically challenged, socially challenged, and perhaps most of all those types, unmotivated. And they come from every one of those classifications. This may appear to be expensive, but in reality, it should be low-hanging fruit. They are here, they're likely to stay here, and they will be internally grateful if we can help them read so that later they can read to learn all of their lives. We will move them from recipients of government spending to economic contributors and part of our much-needed workforce. It is in a time like now, nearly full employment, what possible reason would we have to not stomp the gas on higher literacy rates? Secondly, college and career ready. This is a little more complicated. Every analysis, and did you get the HP report this morning, or you're going to get it later? And it talks about that, about embedding those life skills. My wife told our kids growing up about making choices. Every time I speak at commencement, I talk about choices. Showing up, how they spend their time, how they prepare every day. Are they curious? Hard work, obvious. The ability to work in teams, which I would submit, having spent quite a bit of time in the classroom, this generation of educators are doing a lot better job of doing that than my generation did. And I know that it shows up every day that working in teams in education system. Fundamentally, one of the most important is grit. How do you roll with the punches? And my favorite is adapt to change. My staff suggested I say, we can predict the future of technology only to a certain extent. My old adage is that change is inevitable. Adaptation and survival are optional. Today's graduates will have an average, and this is actually old data, I haven't checked with it lately, and it depends on what industry you're in, but today's graduates will have an average of 7 career changes. That means they absolutely have to be lifelong learners. As we work on soft skills, we need to address both the bifurcation and the combination of CTE and traditional higher education. America and Idaho are not Germany, we're not Asia. We do not select children at an early age that says Brad will be a line worker and Dr. Pate will be a doctor. The magic of the American free enterprise success is diversity, creativity, freedom to choose, and yes, freedom to fail. Idaho obviously wants more success than failure, but if we fail, let's boldly learn from failure and charge forward. This is the goal of this conference in the age of agility. We need to create incentives and programs where students, parents, and counselors point and incent and tutor our students into the right path. To meet this goal will require a great consortium of business, educators, parents, and government. That's why you are here. That is our challenge. We have a variety of great programs all over Idaho. Many highly successful, some not so much, but in many areas we have no programs, especially in rural Idaho, the most susceptible areas to a talent shortage. Rural businesses have a burden as they reach out to schools to partner to create effective CTE programs. Forest products industry, mines, farms, small manufacturing, food processing will have good talent recruitment if they partner with schools. Some examples, Idaho Forest Group's Modern Sawmill program at North Idaho College, Western Equipment's training at CWI, Schweitzer Engineering at both Lewiston High School and LCSC, AGC with the construction management program here at Boise State, the food industry with their new degree in food processing at CSI, welding and fabrication at the College of Eastern Idaho, and hundreds of small businesses who donate time and equipment to high school CTE programs. We're doing it. I'm all in. We just need to increase these partnerships. That effort involves all the players that are right here in this room. Let me thank all who volunteered hundreds of hours to serve in the K to Career Future that Our Kids, Idaho's Future Task Force, led by Bill Gilbert and Debbie Critchfield. They're focusing on my 2 things of their own advocation, and that's literacy and how we measure that, and college and career readiness. I expect the first round of recommendations in November, and other great things are happening in our talent strategy. Our STEM Action Center has facilitated incredible numbers, especially if you look at where we started. The Workforce Development Council, internships, apprenticeships, the best way to learn and to do it. Thank you, Trent and Wendy. Other great programs and advocates like the Idaho Department of Labor, IBE, and IACI, and many of these efforts are a result of legislative support and leadership. I want to thank all the legislators that are in the room today. We all share a common understanding of what is needed to prepare our students and meet the needs of business. The next generation will have to rely on increased soft skills and problem solving, adapting more than any other generation before it. It's our job to prepare them. We are not here just to talk, but to act. Business needs to send signals to government and education about what their needs are and participate to answer those needs. Government needs to listen and remove barriers. And educators need to listen to both businesses and our students. I need all of you to keep the momentum, especially that we know the growth we're experiencing will inevitably slow. We won't be the fastest growing state forever. Now is the time to reaffirm our commitment and invest in and coordinate in this age of agility. Thank you very much. All right. Now I understand it's stump the chump time, so. I know better. Who's going to be first? Don't be bashful. Rod.
I'm an old professional question person. So, Governor, you mentioned your task force and its work. What is your fondest hope from the results of that task force? What do you, if you can name one thing you'd really like them to achieve for you, what would?
Well, I don't know if you heard Rod's question, but it was about what's my goal on the task force. A, that it be simple enough that I can understand it, not be 10, 20, 30 recommendations, and the fact that we have the diversity that exists on that, but that collectively the state gets behind that we have a general consensus among the business community, the education community, the people of Idaho. These are the next logical steps for us to continue to advance. But particularly those people, those professionals that work in the classroom, that they know what we expect of them and what we want them to do. And that I will gauge that as success. And of course, at the end of the day, if we move the needle significantly on literacy, I'll be a happy camper. So, is that you, Mr. President?
Yeah, it certainly is, Your Honor. How are we doing on the conversation and working through outcomes-based funding in terms of higher education?
Well, of course, I take my clues from, of course, whatever Bert says is the top of the list, but from the State Board of Education, I haven't even seen the budget request yet. We all know what the task force on higher education did 2 years ago now, and I assume that will be part of it. But I also look for the advice and recommendation of this group. Everywhere I go all over the state, the issue that you're talking about in this room about what do we do for workforce development, what do we do in CTE, what do we do about getting those people that need to be retrained, but particularly where we reach down into our high schools and get those kids started on a path that they go forward. You know, the community colleges are a little different than the higher education, but as I said in my talk, we have to bifurcate this issue, but we also need to coordinate it. There's nothing wrong with a kid thinking he's going to be a doctor and then becoming a diesel mechanic. There's nothing wrong with a kid that starts off as a diesel mechanic that wants to be a doctor. That's the American way. We just have to have the least amount of impediments, and we have to introduce them. The statistics that you hear about the need for talent, particularly in Dr. Pate's area of healthcare, is just, they're astronomical. But we have so many fields where they're there, and that's why I like the community college model, because you're more attuned to the local area about what's important in your community. Who are your partners, as you've taught me, Bert, over the years. When Bert says partners, that means he wants money. Plead guilty to that. But that's part of what we're talking about here, is that that when I go in, and I get this once in a while, you wouldn't know it, but I will tell you that I'll see a business that's either expanding or a new one that's coming in, and they'll say, we're making it, but we're just by the skin of our teeth. We need 60 employees, and we had 64 apply. You know, that's good in every realm. You know, last quarter, Idaho had the second highest income growth of any of the 50 states. Texas was the only one ahead of us. And of course, if you look at what the oil industry's down there, that's very understandable. But, you know, we got a lot of programs that we need to put in now. It's one of the issues that's a big drainer of revenue in the state is our corrections program. If we can have programs to where we take those people that are stuck in the correction system through the revolving door and make them productive members of society, that's a great win-win for us. So my long answer to your short question is I haven't seen the request yet, but we're at that stage of the game. So.
Governor, are there any other states that you admire for their approach to education policy, and if so, which ones?
Well, actually, of course, all the states are different. You know, if you look at what's happened in Massachusetts, and the incredible thing about Massachusetts, they had a plan and they've stuck with it. But Idaho is in no way, shape, or form Massachusetts. Kim Reynolds, that's the governor of Iowa, when she was lieutenant governor, she really worked on a lot of workforce training. When we get together as governors, matter of fact, I was talking to Governor Herbert in Utah about it yesterday, about some of the programs they have there. But, you know, Idaho is about as diverse a state as you're going to find, given our relatively small population. So what works in other states doesn't necessarily work here, and that's why it's important for groups like this to collectively get together and say, what do we need to address the issue in our community, in our region, and because what works in eastern Idaho isn't what's going to work in Coeur d'Alene. So, Terry?
Thank you for being here, Governor. As a businessman, I do want to thank you so much for taking so much regulation off our back. And now that I wear a hat called trustee for a school district, I would like to have you turn your efforts and reduce so many of those regulations that we seem to have to live with to help us do the job from a local level.
Well, Terry's campaigning for school board. I'll give you that. I'll give you that disclaimer. And he was sucking up to me about my rules thing, and I appreciate that. But he brings up a very valid point about, you know, that line that we have about, you know, the legislature, and a lot of these are federal program dollars too, about all that part of the code that school administrators and school trustees have to deal with. And look, I can fix the rules, but the legislature has to fix the code. They didn't leave town and say, oh, the code's gone, you got to fix that. But I might take the opportunity if it comes around. But I think we just need to be conscious of it. I do want to talk a little bit about the rules thing, because what I was very blessed in that my agencies, and it's the State Board of Education, Department of Education, every single agency out there, it allowed the people that are there that are dealing with those day in and day out to say, why is this here? That was not an opportunity. Our system is a great system, the Administrative Procedures Act, and how it works. But the fact that we implanted that possibility, we need to probably do the same. Well, I know we need to do the same thing in education. The State Board, the State Department, the legislature needs to say, how do we how do we clear some of this away? But you know, most of those programs, as are most laws, were put in for a good reason to address something. The issue is, at some point in time, how do you go back and clean that all up? How do you have I got plenty for my poor task force to do. I'm not going to dump this on them and say, let's get rid of 20% of the regulations of the code. That's actually up to your seatmate there and his job at the legislature. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Governor, thanks for being with us today. My question for you is on looking at the pipeline coming in through education, homegrown talent. What do you think is the biggest barrier for the early grades for the people working in the classroom to do their job correctly? It seems like I hunt with a lot of these friends of mine, and I just hear a lot of frustration. So, from your vantage point, what do you think is the biggest barrier?
Well, the question's on, I assume, what the barrier is to getting people into the classroom. Once again, I want to thank the legislature for supporting our efforts to increase starting teacher pay to, at a minimum, just to send a signal. Send a signal that we appreciate their commitment to our kids. We fully understand that in other professional fields, they'd be compensated at a higher level. I believe that the task force is going to talk about part of that. The Department of Education, Sherry and the Department of Education, the state board, they're constantly talking about it. But it's twofold. A, it's cash. It's how are they paid. But more importantly, it's how do we honor the profession. And how do we say, here's where we are, here's where we're going, we're going to give you the flexibility to get there, given the incredible diversity of the student population that walks through the front door. You know, like I alluded to, the challenges that some of these kids have are just enormous compared to what they used to be. As the state grows and we have more challenges, their product that they get as educators is a much more challenging group than what it was 20, 40, and 60 years ago in the state of Idaho. So we have to tell them, A, we support them, B, we're going to give them the resources, and C, we need to say, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, you're in charge, you fix it. And I've been in districts, I've been in classrooms where that's taking place every day, where educators are analyzing the problem of this particular student or this small group of students and doing what they need to do to get them over those hurdles to where they can be successful in whatever their dreams and aspirations are.
Governor?
Trent.
We heard this morning from an esteemed national speaker who said that the skill set of the future is most likely to be multidisciplinary, so that the degree that you got from one college is just a part of it. You've got to then add maybe a different discipline. That means that we may need to tap into more than one Idaho higher educational institution. And at least my perception is that our collegiate tribalism tends to be a barrier to that. Can you, a good vandal, be a good spokesperson for us looking at our statewide educational system as a system that, you know, we might have some credits from ISU and some credits from BSU as well?
Well, Trent, who we were discussing at lunch, is actually in the unemployed here in Idaho, and he's part of he doesn't qualify in the workforce participation. So my goal here today is that we can find Trent Clark a real job. But his question was about, you know, the diversity of skills that are needed and the fact that, you know, actually, I think, you know, Trent wasn't on the IACI board when we wrote our higher ed, this was in the early 80s, and we did a task force on higher education, and the first analysis by the group that came in privately and looked at is, you got plenty of higher education in Idaho, given the fact that you got four-year institutions in Idaho, given the size of the state of Idaho. But that is a little bit of an issue, but I will tell you that from my perspective, with the four new presidents of our four-year institutions, the language and the talk and the actions that I'm hearing from them is what's going to address what Trent's talking about, is the fact that some of these issues, they're going to have to hopscotch around, whether it be virtually or whether it be in reality, to get the skills they need to go forward. One of our best examples is the Center for Advanced Energy Studies in Idaho Falls, where all three of them have a presence there with the lab, and they address some of the most vexing issues we have in whether it be cybersecurity or our energy and security of our future going forward. And I can tell you, I was at I've been at 2 events in the last couple of weeks. It is working there. And that serves as an example for us to look at some of these other areas to where they can communicate, coordinate, and their statement that they put out is the fact that they're going to work on transferability of those credits from one institution to the other, so that there's no friction cost of moving from one institution to the other. And of course, that goes down into the opportunity scholarships, and that those scholarships that you state taxpayers are paying $4,100 per student that are available, that stacks on top of those degrees that go from one to the other, and I'm all in on that. So. Okay.
You're 10 months in the office. I would be curious to know, a lot of us in this room, we're problem solvers, right? We find a problem, we go solve it. I'd be interested to hear your perspective on maybe something that's caught you by surprise as a problem, and something that's captivated your brain and how to solve a certain problem.
Oh, I'm confused every day. Well, the questions about problem solving. I am, even though I am a politician, my ego's, if I can just beat it down a little bit and reach out to people, whether they're in the state of Idaho or outside of the state of Idaho, to help me resolve that issue, is break that elephant into pieces to where it's edible. I was very fortunate to be involved in the business world and spent some time with some of the real entrepreneurs and industrial builders of the state, and every one of those hired good people, gave them general direction, and then try to get there. When you come to a barrier, a good one that we're wrestling with right now is the opioid crisis. We put together a very broad group to look at it because, you know, at first blush, you say, well, I'm going to ban opioids. That's probably the worst thing you can do, because that moves them to heroin and fentanyl and all kinds of other problems. And if you just take a deep breath, look at it, then you got to go find the people to help you solve that issue. And sometimes those answers aren't in Idaho, but for the most part they are. You just have to break down those big problems into small enough pieces and get enough expertise to address it. Corrections is one that's, you talk about workforce development and you talk about education, it's Medicaid and corrections that have been the giant sucking sound on our budget that we haven't been able, as policymakers in Idaho, to invest in those what we should because of what they do. We're aggressively working on managed Medicaid. We're trying to get our arms around corrections to where we can address the recidivism rate. We're trying to get our arms around the corrections to where we can slow the pipeline coming in, that our drug courts and our problem-solving courts and our mental health issues and our substance abuse things are all part of the way of solving that issue. Those are big, hairy problems, and you got to have a team to address them, just like our K-12, our Kids Idaho's Future Task Force is doing. Everybody done with dessert? Yes.
I'm heartened by your position with regards to those that are within the criminal justice system, but I feel that there's another group of people in Idaho that are marginalized within the employment systems that are here
Well, the questions about any kind of developmentally disabled people with special needs, you know, now's the time to solve that. When you got 10% unemployment, there's some great companies in Idaho that have had a policy for years that they make a special effort to reach out to them. But unfortunately, that isn't the case everywhere. But right now, with with less resources than probably would have been the case before, you'll have a willing participant in somebody to offer them an opportunity if the state just helps a little bit. And I think we're at that place now. There's some great programs there, but you know, there's those with those developmental disabilities, and a bigger group in Idaho are the mental health challenges and the substance abuse problems. We've got programs that are going to be implemented well, some of them are implemented right now. Some of them are going to be implemented going forward, but the correction system, developmentally disabled, every one of those right now, as we work to solve this vexing problem of having enough talent to solve all our problems, now's the time to take advantage of it, because, and once after an employer starts and finds out the kind of skills that are different than the traditional set of skills that they would have, but those people all bring a new set of skills. And I know some Idaho companies that they've just had a policy, they've done it for a long time, and it's been very rewarding for them. So I guarantee you, like a lot of these problems, we're not doing everything that's possible, but it's in our rangefinder. We're trying to work on it, and there's great people both in private philanthropy and in the government sector that are working to resolve that issue. But we got more opportunities now than we ever had before. Okay, well, you can get back to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.